Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this 17th day of August, 2010, this Tuesday edition. David McMichael, a former CIA analyst, will be joining us today to deal with the top story. Israel has 8 days to hit Iran's nuclear site. That is now in the French news agency Today. The top story on the Drudge Report, Kurt Nimmo noticed these drumbeats in the last 2 days and has written several articles dealing with it. That the neocons are saying that they need to strike by the 21st, 22nd, or 23rd, because they don't actually turn the reactor on until a few days after that. So here's the headline. Israel has 8 days to hit Iran nuclear site. Israel has 8 days to launch a military strike against Iran's Bashir nuclear facility and stop Tehran from acquiring a functioning atomic plant, a former U.S. envoy to the UN has said. Iran is to bring online its first nuclear power plant built with Russian help on August 21st, when a shipment of nuclear fuel will be loaded into the plant's core. At that point, Bolton warned it will be too late for Israel to launch a military strike against the facility because an attack would spread radiation and affect Iranian civilians. So they have to attack it to save Iranians. Got to love that spin. Once the uranium, once those fuel rods are very close to the reactor, certainly once they're in the reactor, attacking it means a release of radiation. No question about it, Bolton told Fox Business Network. So if Israel's going to do anything against Bashir, it has to move the next 8 days. And he said this yesterday. And other neocons said it over the weekend. So how is it 8 days? The 21st is 5 days away. It goes on. Absent an Israeli strike, Bolton said Iran will achieve something that no other opponent of Israel, no other enemy of the United States, the Middle East, really has, and that is a functioning nuclear reactor. But when asked whether he expected Israel to actually launch attacks against Iran within the next 8 days, Bolton was skeptical. I don't think so. I'm afraid they've lost the opportunity, he said. The controversial former envoy of the United Nations criticized Russia's role in development of the plant, saying the Russians are, as they often do, playing both sides against the middle. The idea of being able to stick a thumb in America's eye always figures prominently in Moscow, he said. Iran dismissed the possibilities of such an attack from its arch foes. So we're going to be talking more about that coming up in 30 minutes with David McMichael. We called to get Ray McGovern on, former top CIA analyst, yesterday, but he was going to be traveling today and tomorrow. So he recommended his friend, David McMichael, who, in his words, was even more senior than he. So I look forward to interviewing Mr. McMichael and to get his expert analysis of the situation coming up in about 30 minutes. In fact, exactly 30 minutes from now, 33 after, when he joins us. Also, after the break that's coming up, Pentagon warning over China military buildup. Here's another headline. Pentagon says China's military power is growing. Another headline, China targets U.S. troops with arms buildup. Another headline from Reuters, China, U.S. playing risky game on the high seas. China tests space station module to launch in 2011. North Korea flew drone over sensitive border, South Korea. This is all AP, Reuters, Washington Times. They're really introducing China as the enemy. I've got an issue with that. Why did the globalists arm and fund China at the disadvantage of the United States? And then now they're claiming China wants to get America when they've put China in this position of power over this crumbling country. It's all part of their master plan. We'll discuss that coming up. We'll also get into Dr. Paul Craig Roberts' article, The Ecstasy of Empire, published at Infowars.com. What was it? 4 months ago, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former head of policy at the Department of the Treasury under Reagan, the father of Reaganomics, Wall Street Journal editor, syndicated columnist, retired. But then he came right back from retirement, because you can't keep a good guy down, and said, hey, I'll start sending you my columns to publish at Infowars.com. And we're glad he did that, because every week or so, the Drudge Report is now linking to his columns, something the Drudge Report didn't do previously. And his latest article is The Ecstasy of Empire. And the Drudge Report linked to it yesterday. It's still up there today. It's moved from the top of the page to the left-hand column, The Ecstasy of Empire. And the article ends with a quote here saying, without a revolution, Americans are history. I would simply alter that to say, without a restoration, Americans are history. But that's called revolution by the criminal corporations that have taken over this nation. And on short notice, he's agreed to come on. I appreciate the crew getting on that. He'll be joining us after David McMichael comes on, coming up in about 25 minutes. He's a former Central Intelligence Agency top analyst, 10-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He was a counterinsurgency expert in Southeast Asia for his 4 years there. He also served as an analyst for the National Intelligence Council, and, of course, a lot more. He has a Ph.D. in history from the University of Oregon, and it just goes on from there. He will be joining us to break down, of course, the most important news that we're facing. We noticed that key neocon operatives like Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic and, of course, Mr. Bolton, a former UN ambassador under Bush, are saying Israel has got to hit the Bashir reactor within 3 days of the fuel rods being delivered on the 21st. They're supposed to be inserted by the 24th or 25th, because then it would create a Chernobyl-type meltdown situation if they bomb an active reactor. So they're pushing this like it's some type of humanitarian preemptive strike. And, of course, 3 weeks ago, Ray McGovern, former top CIA analyst, said the word is they've green-lighted a possible attack. They're locked and loaded with the Israelis and the U.S. military with a bombardment strategy targeting hundreds of installations inside Iran. They're already preparing the blockade, which is an act of war, according to the Geneva Convention and what Ron Paul has talked about from the House floor. So Israel has 8 days to hit Iran's nuclear site, Bolton says. AFP, this just came out in the French news agency, and Reuters in the last 3 hours. Proud of Kurt Nimmo catching all this war chatter over the weekend, having the first big article out on it yesterday morning with the headline, Iran attack within the next week. So we will continue to break all of this down coming up, and we'll look at the economy and the state of affairs with Dr. Roberts. He'll be popping in for 30 minutes at the bottom of the next hour. We'll have wide open phones in the third hour of the transmission today. First, I wanted to get into the Pentagon and the media are really beating the drum now that China is our enemy and that China is a threat. And, of course, that's true, but not in the perspective, not in the way that they are presenting it. If you look at the deals that Richard Milhouse Nixon, under Kissinger's directives, engaged in back in the 1970s, and you look at what the ambassador to China set up, George Herbert Walker Bush in the 70s, the globalists, the Council on Foreign Relations and others, the Anglo-American elite, went to China and said, we will make you the heart of the future world government. In the next century, the 21st century, will be the Chinese century. We want to move our main base of operations over to China. They then, in subsequent administrations of Ford, Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Clinton, George W., and now Obama, got laws passed and engaged in regulatory maneuvers where almost all of our industry moved to China. They raised the taxes, increased the regulations, the harassment on the United States, and then put tax incentives in to move industry to China. The United States, countless times, has given our weapons technology to China. They've conduited the technology to Israel, who publicly sells it to the highest bidder, not just to China, but to South Africa, France, anybody else, Russians, who will buy it. You're not supposed to criticize what Israel's doing, basically taking over many areas of the Pentagon and creating the Office of Special Planning that creates the fake WMD propaganda and that uses the private contractors privatizing the military to feed disinfo. I mean, it's just incredible how this country's been taken over. So the United States, for all intents and purposes, isn't even manufacturing most of its military hardware in the United States. It's going on in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and now in some cases, China. They're even starting some of their weapons contracts for some of the components in Vietnam. in South Korea. I mean, this is a joke. We can't even make our weapons here because the United States is being dissolved. We supply poor people to be the manpower of the military because they can't get regular jobs. That's the plan. And the United States is having its credit card run up into astronomical stratospheric red to fund the globalization. Then the United States is to be blamed and is being blamed for all the ills of the world. You see this with global media consortiums like News Corp. In European publications they own, they demonize the United States. But then domestically, they push the wars and all the propaganda and tell us that we're fighting a holy, fight for Christendom and the clash of civilizations. So they're playing all different sides off against each other in this complex balancing act. And now the Pentagon comes out and says, oh, my gosh, China is now the second biggest economy. Within 12 months, they're set to be the biggest economy. They are the biggest user of energy. Within 3 years, they will completely dwarf us, not only overtake us, and China and India and 100 plus other, it's over 160, third world and developing world nations have zero environmental standards, zero carbon taxes, and then tax incentives for our businesses to move there. Of course, the country's going into cardiac arrest. Of course, all the new state and federal taxes are causing the economy to go into cardiac arrest even faster. This is all a consolidation operation. So all these people in the media that wrap themselves in the American flag and say that if you're against wars, that if you're against invasions, that if you're against all of this tyranny, all of these individuals that are out there promoting this, they know full well what they're doing. They know full well what they are a part of. And then they always sell you on naked body scanners and checkpoints and surveillance cameras and face scanning and license plate reading cameras on their fighting al-Qaeda. But then you discover al-Qaeda is their creation to destabilize, whether it's southern Serbia or whether it's Pakistan or Afghanistan. It's a divide and conquer mode. And you discover that almost all of the training that goes on, I'd say over 95% of it or more, is not for fighting turbaned men from Central Asia or the Middle East. The entire architecture of this is designed and publicly admitted to be for the American people. And there's a giant, illegal, covert intelligence operation now going public, because they've completed it, of threat fusion centers, federalizing police with the CIA in control of the bases, merging local police with the military. This is all happening now. So let's go over some of this latest propaganda. They've destroyed our industry. They're coming in with the carbon taxes. They're federalizing everything. And then they tell you that China is supplanting the United States when it's the globalist and the Council on Foreign Relations. Just search the term CFR.org, the Chinese century. And they brag with pleasure in countless C-SPAN productions in the last decade. Before that, they were having secret meetings, and the CFR was almost completely secret. Now they're out in the open saying that this was part of their plan to where we're totally dependent on China, who is authoritarian and has enslaved their people, and who is a eugenic state carrying out forced abortions, infanticide, one-child policies, and mass drugging of their water supplies, just as our water supplies are drugged. They are on the globalist team. They work with the bankers. And now they're giving the public the narrative of why we're collapsing, blaming it on the communist Chinese when they're only a large engine in the larger structure. They're just one of the larger cogs in all of this. Pentagon warning over Chinese military buildup, French news agency. China is extending its military advantage over Taiwan and increasingly looking beyond, building up a force with power to strike in Asia as far afield as the U.S. territory of Guam, the Pentagon said. Well, yeah, now they menace U.S. shores on the east and west coast, Atlantic and Pacific, with their nuke subs. In an annual report to Congress, the U.S. Defense Department said Monday that China was ramping up investment in an array of areas, including nuclear weapons, long-range missiles, submarines, aircraft carriers, and cyber warfare.